Everyone in hell got there the same way. You lived, you did the things you did. You died, and that part is important. That part is the whole foundation. You died, and then you were judged, and you lost, and you fell, screaming or numb or in denial, down through the dark and into the red, and hell received you the way it received everyone, by knowing exactly what you were. A sinner, a soul, a thing with a death already behind it, and if heaven had its way, a second and more permanent death somewhere ahead. Hell had been doing this for longer than anyone could count, and it had never once met an arrival it could not name, because the cosmos is orderly, and the orderly thing about damnation is that it is a destination, and a destination only takes things that have left somewhere else. Then, on an unremarkable red evening over Pentagram City, something fell out of the sky that had broken every part of that. It had not died, that was the first impossible thing. It had not been judged, because there was no completed life to weigh. The ledger was still open, the body still somehow in use. It could not lose the way the damned lose, because it could not be killed by hell or heaven or anything in between, a fact it knew about itself with a weary, bone-deep certainty that no one else in the afterlife could have understood. And worst of all, strangest of all, the detail that would make this the most disruptive arrival in the history of the pit, it knew it was in a story. It looked up at the red sky and the pentagram and the floating cathedrals of the overlords, and instead of screaming, it grinned under its mask. And it said to no one, to everyone, to the audience it always somehow knew was there. Oh neat, hell's got a hotel. Hell, which had a category for every kind of damned thing that had ever existed, opened its great, indifferent mouth to file the new arrival where it belonged. And for the first time in a very, very long time, it had absolutely nothing to say. Let's back up 4 seconds, because somebody in this story has to provide context, and the narrator's union says it's me. Hi, I'm the red one, you already knew that, you clicked on the thumbnail. Here's the thing you need to understand about Wade Wilson, and I'm going to tell it to you straight for exactly 1 paragraph before the jokes come back, because the jokes are load-bearing and we can't keep the structure up without them. The man cannot die. Not is hard to kill. Not has a great healing factor, although also that, cannot die. Somewhere along the line, a big purple nihilist with a crush on the literal personification of death got jealous of Wade, because Wade had a crush on her too, the lady with the skull face, the only date who ever really got him, and to keep them apart forever, the purple guy cursed Wade with immortality, took death off the table, made it so that no matter what happens to Wade Wilson, no matter how badly he wants the lights to go out, the lights come back on, every time, forever. He has wanted to die for a long, long time. He is very funny about it. The 2 facts are the same fact, and if you've been paying attention to the other videos on this channel, you already know that's how these stories work. So 4 seconds ago, Wade had, through a series of events involving a teleporter, a magic sword, a botched job, and a frankly heroic quantity of chimichangas, managed to do the thing he is never allowed to do. He died. Actually died all the way, lights out, the works, and for 1 perfect golden instant he had felt himself going, felt the curse finally hiccup, felt the door he'd been pounding on for years swing open, and he had thought with his whole ridiculous heart, finally. Finally I get to see her, finally I get to stop. And then he woke up in hell. Which, let's sit in this for a second, because it's the funniest and saddest thing that has happened to anybody in any of these videos, is the cosmic equivalent of finally falling asleep and waking up in the waiting room of the DMV. He'd reached for oblivion, for peace, for the skull-faced girl of his dreams, and instead the healing factor had kicked back in halfway through the dying, rebooted the body, and dumped him, not dead, not alive, glitching, into the afterlife's lobby, processed by a system that runs entirely on the assumption that everyone who arrives has finished the one task Wade has never been able to complete. He stood up in a red alley in Pentagram City and patted himself down and found everything still attached, still healing, still on, and he started laughing, because the alternative was the other thing, and Wade Wilson does not do the other thing in public. Okay, he said to the sky, to me, to you. Okay, so I'm not dead. I'm in hell, which fair no notes saw that coming since at least the 2nd act of my life, but I'm not dead. Which means, and here his voice did a thing, just for a second, just 1 flicker before the bit slammed back. K down over it like a manhole cover, which means I didn't even get that right. Then a demon with too many teeth tried to mug him, and Wade put the demon through a wall, and the laugh came back, big and bright and bulletproof, and the flicker was gone like it had never happened. The next 20 minutes were, by the standards of a man who'd had a lot of 20 minutices, pretty good. Hell, it turned out, greets newcomers the way a pack of wolves greets a dropped sandwich, and a steady parade of locals came to test whether the rumors were true. They shot him. He healed and reviewed their aim. They set him on fire, which in a place that is already on fire is frankly just rude, and he walked out of it patting embers off a suit that knit itself back together faster than the flames could ruin it. A trio of hellborn enforcers jumped him in an alley, and he narrated the entire fight in real time like a sports announcer, calling his own highlight reel, which is psychologically devastating to people who are used to their victims screaming. By the time the sun, or whatever hell uses instead of a sun, some big sullen red eye in the smog, had moved, the word on the street had upgraded from new sinner to do not engage. It's worse than Alastair and it won't shut up. The funniest part, and I'm allowed to say it's funny, it's me, was the Overlord. A mid-tier one, ambitious, the kind that's clawed up 2/3 of the ladder and can taste the top, sent his people to collect the unkillable curiosity as an asset. You sign a soul, you get its power. That's the local stock market. They hauled Wade into a velvet office and slid a contract across a desk, and the Overlord gave the whole speech. The I can offer you everything, kneel and prosper speech. The speech that has worked on the desperate dead for centuries. Wade signed nothing. Wade talked for 40 minutes about Betty White. He drew a unicorn on the contract. He asked the Overlord 3 increasingly personal questions about his childhood, and then answered them himself incorrectly and at length. And when the Overlord finally reached across the desk to take the soul by force, the move that always worked, the move that had never once failed to at least find the soul to grab, his claws closed on nothing, because the thing the contract was written to steal was still bolted to a body that refused to finish dying, and you cannot repossess a house somebody is still living in. The Overlord stared at his empty hand. Wade ate the man's desk pen. It was, all things considered, a lovely first day. And under every single second of it, the bullets, the bit, the unicorn, the desk pen, the manhole cover stayed shut, and the thing beneath it stayed quiet, and Wade Wilson did not let himself notice that he was, for the very first time, somewhere genuinely full of the dead, and still, somehow, the only one in the room who couldn't join them. It had happened, remember it happened, we'll need it later. Across the city, in a building that should not have been standing and stayed up mostly out of stubbornness, a young woman with horns and a heart 2 sizes too big for the neighborhood was trying, for the 900th time, to convince hell that it could be better than it was. Her name was Charlie Morningstar. She was the princess of this whole red rotten place, the daughter of the literal devil, which is a sentence that should make a person terrifying, and instead, in her case, made her earnest, which down here was far stranger and far more dangerous to the established order. And she had an idea. The idea was the most insane thing anyone in hell had ever heard, and she believed in it with the total uncomplicated faith of a person who has decided that being right is less important than being kind. She believed the damned could change. This is the system, and you have to understand the system the way you understand the rules in every one of these stories, because the whole thing is about to be tested by a man who breaks rules for a living. Hell, in Charlie's world, ran on a few iron facts. Fact 1, everyone here was sorted. Sinner or hellborn, demon or overlord, prey or predator. Hell categorized you the instant you arrived, and the category was supposed to be forever. Fact 2, everything ran on deals. Power down here was measured in owned souls. The overlords, media tyrants like the V's, old monsters like the radio demon, got strong by trading in the one currency the damned had left, their own selves, signed away in contracts that never expired. In fact 3, the big one, the clock ticking under everything. Once a year, heaven sent its angels down to thin the herd, the extermination. Exorcists with holy weapons that could kill a sinner permanently, the true second death, the one even the dead could still be afraid of, pouring into the streets to slaughter, because heaven had decided the population of the damned was a problem to be managed rather than a tragedy to be mourned.
It's not you.
Harley had looked at all of that, the sorting, the deals, the annual massacre, and she had decided it was wrong. Not strategically wrong, morally wrong. And so she had opened a hotel, this stubborn, impossible building, on the theory that if a damned soul could be loved and helped and shown that it could become better, it could earn its way up out of hell, into heaven, redeemed, and the extermination would have nothing left to harvest. Most of hell thought she was a joke. She had at the time our red friend fell out of the sky, a small and battered family who did not. Vaggie, her sharp-eyed girlfriend, who guarded Charlie's softness like it was the last good thing in the world, because she had decided it was. Angel Dust, the comedian who turned his own pain into a punchline so reliably that no one had ever seen the wound underneath. Keep your eye on him. He matters more than he looks like he does. Husk, the bartender who had been an overlord once and lost it, and now poured drinks and truth in equal measure. Nifty, who was small and fast and not entirely okay. And Alistair, the radio demon, the smiling overlord who had attached himself to the hotel for reasons no one trusted and no one could pry loose, a showman in a deal of his own with something he never named. And here is the thing the whole story rests on, the thing Charlie had recently been given real, actual proof of. It worked. It had worked once. One of her residents, a ridiculous, lonely, snake-shaped inventor, had genuinely changed, had genuinely become good, and had genuinely ascended, risen up out of hell into the light, the first soul in the history of damnation to be redeemed. Charlie had watched it happen. So when something impossible fell out of the sky a few districts over, something hell couldn't sort, couldn't own, and couldn't kill, Charlie Morningstar did not see a threat. She saw the next guest. Word travels fast in hell, especially word about a thing that breaks the rules, because in a place built entirely on rules, a rule breaker is the most interesting thing imaginable, and also, usually, the most profitable. The reports that reached the hotel were garbled and wonderful. A new arrival in a red suit who would not stay dead. Demons had tried, of course they had, that's the local handshake, and it hadn't taken. They'd shot him, he'd healed and complained about the dry cleaning. They'd stabbed him, he'd narrated the stabbing. An ambitious mid-tier overlord had tried to claim him as an asset and gotten a 40-minute monologue about the Golden Girls and no soul to show for it, because, and this was the part that made hell's whole intake bureaucracy seize up like an old engine, the man had no soul to trade in the way the contracts understood it, because his soul was still attached to a body that was still, against all reason and all precedent, in use. He was a glitch, that is the technically correct theological term, and I'd like that on the record. Hell's entire architecture assumed a completed death. The sorting assumed it. The deals assumed it. You can only sell a soul you've finished using. The extermination assumed it most of all, because the whole horror of the annual purge is that the dead can die again, and that second death is the leash heaven keeps everyone on. Take away the completed death, and every one of those systems reached for the new arrival and closed on empty air. He couldn't be sorted because he wasn't a finished soul. He couldn't be owned because he didn't value the thing the contracts were written to steal. And he couldn't be threatened with the second death, the one fear that disciplines all of hell, because death, first or second or 17th, was the one thing in all the worlds that Wade Wilson had been trying to get someone to give him for as long as he could remember. It's worth being honest about the machinery here, the way these stories always level with you before the fun part, because there's a real question under the joke. Which Wade is this, the one whose immortality is a curse from a jealous titan, the version where death herself won't take him? That's the one I'm using because it's the only version where this story has a heart, and I'll flag it plainly. How a man who never actually, permanently died ends up rattling around in an afterlife built for the dead is a thing no canon has ever had to explain, because no canon ever put these two things in the same room. So we're making a reasonable guess and calling it a guess. The guess is this: he got close enough to dead to fall in, and not dead enough to stay sorted, and now he's a splinter in a system that has no tweezers shaped like him. Everything that follows hangs on that, and it's a hypothesis, not a fact, and we're allowed to have fun with it as long as we admit that's what it is. But the part that isn't a guess, the part that's the actual engine of everything, is what it meant. It meant hell had finally received a guest it could. Not control by any of its three usual means, and the one person in all of hell who didn't want to control him was already on her way over with a clipboard and a smile. Charlie found him on a rooftop, eating a chimichanga he had acquired through means best left unexamined, watching the red city the way you'd watch a fire you weren't responsible for. She came in earnest because earnest was the only gear she had. She'd practiced the pitch. She practiced every pitch Charlie believed with her whole heart that the right word said with enough sincerity could move anyone, because the right word said with enough sincerity had once, against every odd, started to move her whole impossible project off the ground. She introduced herself. She told him where he was in case he'd missed it, and what the rules were, and then she told him about the hotel, about redemption, about the idea that anyone, she said, and she meant it so hard it almost hummed, could become better than the worst thing they'd ever done, and earn their way out of the dark. Wade listened to the whole thing. He even let her finish, which for him is basically a standing ovation. He said, "Okay, first of all, the horns are working for you. Very approachable, Satan, love it. Second of all," and he turned and looked at her and looked just for a second past her at the audience at you with an expression that was doing about 6 things at once. "Sweetheart, I gotta tell you, you picked the one guy. You found the single worst possible person to run your little experiment on, and I say that with love and a full mouth of fried cheese. You're trying to sell redemption to a guy who can't die." He stood up. He was grinning. The grin was perfect. The grin was a door he was holding open so that nothing real could get trapped in the room with him. "You want to know the pitch back," he said. "Here's mine. You're selling a way out of hell. Up and out, pearly gates, the whole bit. And I just spent, God, how long was I trying? I just spent a really, really long time trying to find a way out of being me. And the universe looked me dead in the eye and said, no, Wade, you have to stay. Forever. We need you for the bits. So you'll forgive me if I'm not exactly lining up to earn a graduation certificate from a place I literally cannot leave. I can't check out, princess. That's the whole problem. That's been the whole problem the entire time." And there it was, the flicker again, the second one, the manhole cover lifting just enough for Charlie to see something underneath that did not match the voice at all, and then it slammed back down, and Wade clapped his hands together and said, "Anyway, you got a vending machine at this hotel. Do the ghosts here do snacks? I have so many questions and a frankly upsetting amount of energy." And he walked past her toward the stairs, narrating his own exit, and the moment was gone. Charlie stood on the rooftop and watched him go. And here is the thing about Charlie, the thing that makes her the dangerous one, the believer, the one with everything to lose. She had heard it, the flicker, the thing under the joke. Everyone else in hell heard the merc with a mouth and reached for a weapon or a contract. Charlie heard a person making a door-shaped joke so that the room would stay empty, and she recognized it, because she had spent her whole life around people who'd given up, and she had made it her entire purpose to walk through doors people were holding open specifically so she wouldn't. "He's perfect," she said quietly, to no one, with the slightly unhinged delight of a woman who has just been handed the hardest case in the history of her impossible mission, and has decided, instantly and irrevocably, to love him into being okay whether he likes it or not. Vaggie, who had followed at a protective distance and missed none of it, closed her eye and exhaled the specific sigh of a person who can already see the next several weeks of her life and does not care for them. "Charlie, he just told you very clearly with cheese that he doesn't want what we're selling." "I know," Charlie said, glowing. "He can't die, he can't ascend, he can't even be exterminated, Charlie. The one thing that scares everybody here, it doesn't even work on him. There is no leverage, there's no clock. There's nothing to—" Vaggie stopped, because she'd arrived out loud at the exact center of the whole problem, and she hated it. "There's nothing to make him stay." "I know," Charlie said again, and the second time it was softer, and it was the realest thing anyone had said on that rooftop. That's why it counts. He moved into the hotel that night, which surprised everyone, including him, and which he explained at great and deflecting length as being entirely about the free room and the comedic potential, and absolutely not about anything else. Don't read into it. There's nothing to read. It's a bit. I'm doing a bit. The bit is that I live here. Now hilarious. Next. The first night had one moment that mattered, and naturally it happened at the bar, because the realest things in any story happen at the bar after the people who run the place have gone to bed. Wade wandered down at some red hour, found Husk pouring, and ordered something violent. And there on the next stool was the spider, Angel Dust, the hotel's resident comedian, the one who turned every ugly thing that had ever been done to him into a joke so fast and so filthy that no one ever got close enough to the wound to see it bleed. He was mid-bit when Wade sat down, deflecting some question of Husk's with a punchline aimed at his own degradation, laughing at himself before anyone else could, and Wade went very still for about half a second. Because he knew that move. He'd invented a version of that move. He watched Angel Dust make a joke out of his own pain to keep the room from looking too hard, and Wade recognized it the way you recognize your own handwriting on a note you don't remember leaving. And for one beat, the merc with a mouth didn't have anything funny to say, because there is nothing funny about watching someone else do the trick you do, and seeing, from the outside, exactly how much it costs. Then Angel Dust clocked the new guy, sized up the red suit, and said something so unbelievably crude that Husk dropped a glass, and Wade laughed, really laughed, and fired back something worse, and the two of them were off, two comedians in a hell joke-off, while the cat bartender prayed for the second death to come early. It looked like the easiest friendship in the building. It looked like two of a kind finding each other. Nobody at that bar, not Husk, not Charlie listening from the stairs, not even Wade said the quiet part, which was that two people who armor themselves with the exact same joke have not found a friend. They've found a mirror. And mirrors, in stories like this one, are never there by accident. Hold onto the spider, we come back to him. There was one other thing that first night, and it broke Wade in a way the bullets couldn't. Somewhere around the witching hour, Charlie, trying to lift the mood, because lifting the mood is her superpower and also her nervous tick, started to sing, not metaphorically. The lights shifted, an orchestra that did not exist swelled out of nowhere. The staff drifted into backing positions like they'd rehearsed it, and hell, casually, the way it apparently did this all the time, became a full musical number about hope. Wade froze with a drink halfway to his mask. He looked left, he looked right, he looked slowly directly at you. "Are you," he said over the swelling strings to an audience only he could see, "is nobody else, it's a musical. This place is a musical and I'm the only one who," he gestured wildly at the spontaneous choreography. "Where are the instruments coming from? Who is playing the?" A spotlight hit him. He had not asked for a spotlight, the number wanted him in it. And the horror on his masked face was the purest comedy in the whole first night. The one man in hell who knew the difference between a feeling and a production number, getting drafted into a key change against his will. But here's the thing, and it's the seed, so watch it go in. He didn't actually run. He stood at the edge of the number, mugging, narrating, refusing to take it seriously, holding the door open the way he always did. And for about 4 bars, when Charlie hit the part of the song that was just naked, embarrassing, total hope, Wade Wilson stopped talking. Just for 4 bars, just long enough to feel it. Then the cover slammed down, and he loudly requested that the orchestra play something with more swearing, and the moment passed, and everyone laughed. Charlie didn't laugh. Charlie filed away the 4 bars of silence, the way she filed away the flicker on the rooftop, because Charlie was building a case, and the case was he feels it, he just won't let it land, and a girl who has staked her whole life on impossible things knows that 4 bars is not nothing. 4 bars is a crack in the door. And the hotel, which had been built as a machine for reaching the damned, took in its strangest guest and quietly discovered, over that first impossible night, that all of its tools were the wrong shape. Because here is the trap the whole story closes around, the thing Vaggie had said out loud, and Charlie had answered with the only thing that mattered. Every method the hotel had, every method hell had worked by holding something over a soul. The threat of the extermination, the fear of the second death, the weight of a deal, the hope of escape. All of it ran on the assumption that the person across from you wanted to keep living, or feared stopping, or longed to get out. The whole apparatus of the afterlife, redemption included, was built to move people who had something to lose and somewhere to go. Wade Wilson had nothing to lose that he hadn't already begged to lose, and nowhere to go, because the one exit he wanted was the one the universe had nailed shut, and the one exit Charlie offered led somewhere he couldn't reach. You could not threaten him with death. He'd RSVP'd to that party years ago and gotten turned away at the door. You could not own him. He didn't want the thing you'd be taking. You could not even frighten him with hell itself, because hell was, to a man who had been trying to die for a lifetime, almost unbearably close to the thing he wanted, a place full of the dead, the country he'd been denied a passport to, and he was the one resident standing in the lobby who could never actually become a citizen. He was the guest who couldn't check out. He could never finish dying, so he could never be sorted and kept. He could never be redeemed and released, so he could never rise. He was the one damned thing in all of hell that hell's rules could not hold and heaven's rules could not take, a man who had finally, after a lifetime of searching, fallen into the one afterlife that had a room with his name on it, and who could not, by the deepest law of the place, ever truly belong to it. And Charlie Morningstar, Princess of Hell, believer in impossible things, had just decided to spend everything she had reaching him anyway, not because she could threaten him into changing, but precisely because she couldn't, because a redemption that nothing forces is the only kind that proves the thing she'd staked her whole life on, that the damned don't change because they're made to. They change because, somewhere under all the armor, under all the jokes, under the manhole cover that slams down over the flicker, they finally let themselves believe they're allowed to. The merc who couldn't die had checked into a hotel for the dead. The one person who could see the wound under the bit had decided to heal it whether he wanted her to or not, and neither of them knew yet that the joke he'd tee. Old on the rooftop, I can't check out, that's the whole problem, was about to turn out to be the truest and saddest thing anyone said in the entire story. He just didn't know yet that it was sad. He thought it was a punchline. That's where we start. Hell had a way of getting its hooks into a soul. It was very good at it. Thousands of years of practice, an entire economy built on the technique. The hooks came in 3 shapes, and between them they had caught everything that had ever fallen into the pit. There was the deal sign here, and I'll give you power, fame, protection, and all it costs is the one thing you're not using anymore. There was the debt you owe me, and down here debts don't get forgiven, they get collected. And underneath both of those, the hook that held even the overlords in place, there was the death, the second one, the permanent one, the angel steel through the chest that ends even the dead, held over every neck in hell like a blade on a string. 3 hooks deal debt, death. They had never failed to find purchase, because everything in hell wanted to keep something, feared losing something, or hoped to escape something, and a hook only needs one of those to bite. So hell threw all 3 at the man in the red suit. And the hooks went in clean, and found nothing at all to catch on, because you cannot make a deal with a man who doesn't want what you're buying, cannot collect a debt from a man who's already given up everything he had, and cannot threaten with death a man who has spent his whole impossible life standing at death's door, knocking, politely at first and then with increasing desperation, and being told every single time that he is not on the list. Nothing stuck, that was the whole problem, and it was about to become the whole point. The V's came for him first, because of course they did. They were the new money of hell, the media tyrants, and nothing makes new money move faster than a thing it doesn't own yet. Vox, the television-headed one, all glitching screen and surgical charm, ran the numbers and saw the most valuable acquisition in the history of the afterlife. An unkillable asset, a regenerating weapon, a creature you could throw at any problem forever because it always came back. And Valentino, the moth, the pornographer, the one who owned people the way other men own shoes, wanted him for the simpler, uglier reason, which was that Valentino's entire sense of himself ran on the ability to own things, and here was a thing that wouldn't be owned, and that itch could only be scratched one way. They brought him in, they gave him the whole show, the tower, the lights, the contract on the glass desk, the practice two-hander where one of them dazzles and the other one threatens, the routine that had signed away 1,000 souls. Wade had a wonderful time. He complimented Vox's resolution. He asked Valentino, with enormous sincerity, where he got his coat, and then refused to believe the answer, and then asked again. He read the contract out loud in a courtroom stenographer voice, doing all the punctuation, and at the clause where it said the party of the second part forfeits their immortal soul in perpetuity, he stopped and looked up and said, "See, here's my issue with the perpetuity thing," and then talked for 6 minutes about how he'd already tried to forfeit basically everything, and the universe kept mailing it back. Valentino, who had broken the will of harder creatures than this, reached the end of his very long patience and did the thing that always worked, the thing that reminded these little souls exactly who held the leash. He turned on the power, the pheromone, the dominance, the full weight of an overlord who owns you, and he leaned in and made it clear, in the way Valentino made things clear, that Wade would sign because everyone signed, because the alternative was pain, and pain was a language Valentino was fluent in. And Wade looked at the most feared owner in hell turning the full force of ownership on him, and felt absolutely nothing, because you cannot dominate a man with the threat of suffering when suffering is the one thing he's never been able to make stop. And he said, almost gently, in the first not-quite joke he'd made to anyone but the audience, "Buddy, I have been hurt by professionals. You're cute, but you're not even in the top 50. Pain's not a leash on me, it's just the weather." And this is the part that mattered. This is the thread the whole story would pull on later. As the V's people escorted him out empty-handed, Wade passed a side room, and through the open door he saw the contract on another desk, an old one signed years ago, and he saw whose name was on it. Angel Dust, the spider from the bar, the comedian, the one who turned his own degradation into a punchline so fast nobody saw the wound. Valentino owned him. Actually owned him, soul and body and time, the leash Wade had just laughed off, sitting tight and real around the neck of the one person in the hotel who made the same jokes Wade made. Wade stopped walking for exactly 1 second. He didn't say anything, he filed it. But the laugh that carried him out of the V Tower had a different shape than the one that had carried him in, and Wade Wilson, who could not be owned, had just discovered that there was someone in this place who was someone exactly like him, armored in the exact same jokes and not immune at all. That was the first hook that ever caught on Wade. It just wasn't one of Hell's, it was his own. Alistair was a different problem, because Alistair didn't want to own Wade and didn't want to kill him. Alistair wanted to understand him, which is the most dangerous thing a powerful creature can want, and Alistair was the most powerful creature in the building. The radio demon had been watching the new guest the way a very old cat watches a very new kind of bird, delighted, patient, entirely unbothered, already several moves ahead. Because Alistair recognized something in Wade on sight, and it unsettled even him, though he would have died a third time before showing it. He recognized the performance. Alistair had spent his entire afterlife behind a radio host's smile, narrating his own life in a voice that never cracked. A showman who had never once, in death or in life, let anyone see the thing under the act, because the act was the armor, and the armor was the man, and somewhere underneath both there was a deal Alistair himself could not escape, a leash around his own neck held by something he never named, a cage he performed inside so beautifully that people forgot it was a cage. And here was Wade Wilson, doing the exact same thing, with jokes instead of radio static. So they performed at each other. It was, on the surface, the funniest thing in the hotel, two showmen who never broke character, trading bits, each trying to make the other one drop the act first, a duel fought entirely in deflection. Alistair's old-timey menace against Wade's modern motormouth, smile against mask, two creatures who had turned themselves into a permanent broadcast so that no one could ever reach the frequency underneath. The staff watched it like a tennis match. It was hilarious. It was also, if you knew where to look, quietly horrifying, because two people performing that hard at each other are not playing. They're showing each other the exact shape of their own prison and pretending it's a game. Alistair looked at Wade and saw a man whose smile was a locked door, and Wade looked at Alistair and saw a man whose smile was a locked door, and somewhere in the middle of the funniest scene in the hotel, both of them understood that they were looking in a mirror, and neither of them said it, because saying it would mean dropping the act, and the act was the only thing keeping the door shut. The difference, and this is why Alistair is a warning and not a friend, is that Alistair had made his peace with the cage. He performed inside his prison and called it power, and intended to die a third and final time still smiling. The door never once opened. He was what Wade could become, a creature so good at the bit that the bit becomes permanent, the armor fused to the skin, the man underneath simply gone, replaced entirely by the broadcast. When Alistair finally tipped his head and strolled away from their duel, neither of them having cracked, a perfect draw, he left Wade with one line, delivered in that warm radio purr, the only sincere thing the radio demon said in the entire story. "You and I are going to get along famously, friend. We're the same act." A pause, and the smile widened, and the static under it went cold. "Do let me know if you ever find out what's behind yours. I never did bother to check behind mine. Far too late now." And he was gone, and Wade stood there, not laughing, looking at the door the radio demon had just walked through, having been shown, by a monster, in a joke, exactly the shape of the rest of forever if he kept holding his own door shut. And then there was the extermination, the big one, the death clock, the thing the entire hotel was secretly built to outrun. You have to understand what the extermination is to the people of this place. Once a year, heaven's angels come down with weapons that can end a sinner permanently, and they harvest the streets, and for a few red days every damned soul in Pentagram City remembers that the second death is real and close and indifferent. It is the engine of all their fear. It is why Charlie's whole mission exists: get them out before the angels come. It is the single most effective motivator in hell, because it is the one thing even the dead can still lose. Charlie gently, when the topic came up, explained it to Wade not as a threat, she'd never threaten, but as a stakes, a reason the hotel mattered, a clock he should know was ticking. The angels come. They can kill us real. Lie kill us forever. That's what we're racing. Wade thought about it. You could see him take it seriously, actually run the math, give it the real consideration that the most feared thing in hell deserved. So they can permanently kill the people here, he said slowly, with the holy murder weapons, the forever kind. Yes, Charlie said. But not me. Charlie opened her mouth, closed it, and she hadn't let herself fully land on this until he said it out loud. No, not him. The angels could come with all the holy steel in heaven and it would not matter, because the thing every soul in hell feared most was the thing Wade Wilson had been chasing his entire life and been denied. The ultimate enforcement mechanism of the entire afterlife, the blade on the string over every neck, and it simply did not exist for him. You cannot frighten a man with the door he's been knocking on. Yeah, Wade said, and there it was again, the flicker, the third one, quieter than the others. That's the thing about me, princess. The scariest thing you've got is somebody else's happy ending. And he smiled, and it was a door, and he held it open, and Charlie watched the most reliable motivator in all of hell slide off him like rain off glass, and understood that she was going to have to find another way in, because every standard door into this man's soul had been welded shut from the inside a long time ago. So Charlie did the only thing Charlie ever did, the thing that was either her greatest strength or her most reckless flaw depending on who you asked. She kept being sincere at him, relentlessly, daily, with her whole chest. And it bounced. This is the part that mattered to her, the part that hurt, because it wasn't new. She'd been here before early on with Angel Dust, when every earnest thing she said got turned into a joke before it could land, when her sincerity hit his armor and skittered off and she'd started to wonder whether the people she most wanted to reach were exactly the people who'd built themselves specifically so no one could. Wade was that, turned all the way up. She'd offer something real and he'd hand back a bit. She'd get close to a genuine moment, and he'd narrate it to the audience until it stopped being genuine. She'd try to talk about him, about the flicker, about the thing under the jokes, and he would do a voice or eat a snack loudly, or break the fourth wall so hard the moment shattered, every single time, with the reflexes of a man who had survived an immortal lifetime by never once letting a sincere thing sit in the room long enough to require a response. And then there was the song. It was supposed to be a small one, Charlie alone, not performing for anyone, working through a hard day at the piano in the empty lobby, singing the thing she actually believed when she thought no one was listening, that nobody is only the worst thing they ever did, that the door is always open, that you can always come back. She didn't know Wade was on the stairs. And Wade, who knew this place was a musical, who'd been mugging through every production number since the first night, who treated every key change as a punchline, Wade sat down on the stairs in the dark and listened to a girl sing her actual faith to an empty room, and for the second time in the story, longer than 4 bars this time, the merc with a mouth did not have anything to say. He didn't join in, he didn't break it. He just listened in the dark where no one could see, to someone sincerely believe a thing he had stopped being able to believe a long time ago, that a person could stop being who they were, and the manhole cover did not slam down because there was no audience to perform for, and for a few minutes Wade Wilson let a real thing sit in the room with him, and it didn't kill him, and that was new. Then Charlie finished and noticed him, and Wade said something deflecting and fled, but he'd sat through the whole song. Charlie noticed that too. She was still building her case, and the case had a new line in it now. He stayed for the whole song. He just had to make sure no one saw him do it. And here's the thing nobody planned, the thing that crept in under the comedy while everyone was busy failing to redeem him on purpose. Wade started to belong, not officially, not in any way he'd ever admit, but the hotel was a household, and households absorb people whether or not anyone signs off on it, and one chimichanga-scented week at a time, the merc with a mouth got absorbed. He and Husk developed a wordless bartender and regular shorthand, 2 cynics who'd seen too much, communicating entirely in raised eyebrows and refilled glasses. Nifty decided he was hers. She was the one creature in the building genuinely unbothered by anything Wade did, because Wade was, at last, somewhere he was not the strangest thing in the room, and a tiny manic demon who collects bug corpses found his particular energy soothing, which delighted an F. Rankly concerned him. Even Vaggie, who had clocked him on day 1 as a chaotic liability and never fully revised the assessment, found herself fighting beside him in a back alley scrape one night, and discovering that the idiot in Redwood, without making a thing of it, put his unkillable body between a blade and her very killable one, and then immediately ruined the moment with a joke, so she wouldn't have to thank him, so neither of them would have to acknowledge that it had happened. It was a found family forming in real time, the way they always do by accident, around someone who insists they're just passing through. Wade narrated all of it as a bit. I'm not bonding, I'm observing. This is research. I'm writing a Yelp review of the afterlife. But he kept showing up to dinner. He kept being there. And the manhole cover, very slowly, over a montage of red days, started getting heavier to hold shut, because it is genuinely difficult to keep insisting nothing is real when you have started, without deciding to, setting a place for yourself at the table. That was the danger, and Wade could feel it coming the way you feel weather in an old injury. The more it started to feel like home, the more it could cost him, and Wade Wilson's entire life had been a master class in leaving before things could cost him. Hold on to that, because it's the choice the whole story is about to demand of him. But it wasn't Charlie who finally got through, it was the spider. Because here is the truth about armor. The one person who can get past yours is the person wearing the same suit, because they know exactly where the seams are, they have the same seams. Charlie came at Wade with sincerity, and sincerity was the one attack his whole life had trained him to deflect. Angel Dust never attacked at all. Angel Dust just was the same as him, out loud in the next chair, and that was the thing Wade couldn't armor against, because you cannot block a punch that isn't being thrown. It happened slow, over nights at the bar, the two of them trading the filthiest, funniest, most aggressively deflecting material in the building while Husk poured and pretended not to listen. And somewhere in there, Wade started to see it clearly, the thing he'd glimpsed through the door at the V Tower, the thing he recognized because it was his. He watched Angel Dust make a joke out of being owned, out of being used, out of Valentino's leash, turning every ugly real thing into a punchline at exactly the speed Wade turned his own pain into bits. And Wade, watching his own oldest trick performed by someone else, finally saw from the outside what it actually was. Not strength, not toughness. A wound with a comedian standing in front of it, waving, so you'd look at the comedian and never at the wound. "You do the thing," Wade said one night, not joking, which startled both of them. "What thing?" Angel said, already reaching for a bit. "The thing where you get to the joke before anybody can get to you." Wade was quiet for a second. "I do it too. I've done it so long I forgot it was a thing. I thought it was just my face." He looked at the spider, really looked, the way Charlie kept trying to look at him. "It works great, best armor there is. Only problem is it works on everybody." And here his voice did the thing, the flicker, but he didn't slam the cover down this time. He let it stay open for once, including the people who were actually trying to reach you. You build the wall to keep the bad stuff out, and then you find out you walled out the good stuff too, and now you're just in there, alone, with your great jokes, forever. Angel Dust didn't say anything, because Wade had just described Angel Dust's entire afterlife, and Wade had just described his own, and for the first time either of them had said the quiet part where another person could hear it, and neither of them turned it into a bit, and the silence that followed was the realest thing that had happened in the hotel since Wade arrived. "So why'd you stay?" Angel said finally, careful, the way you step on ice. "At the hotel. You can't get redeemed, you keep telling everybody. You can't die, can't ascend, can't do the whole graduation thing. So what's the angle? Guys like us always got an angle." And Wade, who had 100 deflections loaded, who could have done a voice, who could have eaten something loudly, looked at the spider, and for once just answered. "I don't know," he said. "That's the honest one. I genuinely don't know. I keep telling myself I'm leaving. I've packed twice. A beat. I keep unpacking. There's a tiny demon who reorganizes my knives. I think I live here now, and I don't remember agreeing to it." "That's how it gets you," Angel said quietly, and he wasn't joking either. "That's exactly how it got me. You don't decide, you just stop leaving." Two mirrors finally looking at each other instead of past each other. That was the crack, not Charlie's sincerity, which slid off, not Alistair's recognition, which only showed Wade the cage. It was the spider, the one person who proved that the jokes were a wound and not a face, who finally got Wade Wilson to admit, out loud, that the armor had a cost, and that somewhere under it he had already, accidentally, started to want the thing he kept insisting he couldn't have. And Charlie, watching from the doorway, finally understood what she was actually dealing with. Here's the reframe, the thing the whole section had been walking toward, the moment the hardest case turned out to be a different kind of hard than anyone thought. Charlie had assumed at the start that Wade was the hardest case because he was the worst, the most violent, the most damaged, the one with the longest list. That's what hardest to redeem had always meant in hell, a question of how much sin you had to dig through, and she'd been wrong. Wade's sin wasn't the obstacle. Plenty of souls in the hotel had done terrible things and still reached for the door. The obstacle was something else entirely, something she only saw clearly after the bar, after the song he sat through, after watching him recognize his own wound in the spider's jokes. Wade didn't deflect redemption because he was evil. He deflected it because he had stopped believing it was possible, not for other people, for himself. Somewhere in an immortal lifetime of being unable to die, unable to change his circumstances, unable to escape his own body or his own history or his own face, Wade Wilson had quietly concluded that you don't get to stop being who you are. He couldn't even die to escape himself, the one exit everyone gets, he'd been denied. So how could he possibly believe in a smaller exit, a gentler one, the idea that you could simply choose to become someone better? He treated Charlie's whole pitch as a joke, not because it was beneath him, but because it was, to him, obviously false, a kindness offered by someone who didn't understand. ND that some people are stuck being themselves forever, and that he was the most stuck person who had ever existed. The thing standing between Wade and redemption was not his sin, it was his despair. A despair so old and so total that he'd built a clown around it, a permanent bit, a 40-year deflection, specifically so that no one, including him, would ever have to look directly at the fact that he had given up on the possibility of being anything other than what he was. Charlie had been trying to convince a bad man to be good. That was never the job. The job was to convince a hopeless man that change was possible at all, and that it was possible even for him, even for the one creature whose own immortality seemed to prove that nothing about you ever gets to end. And the only tool for that job, she realized, was the one thing she had, and the one thing his armor was specifically built to repel. Somebody who refused to stop treating him as real, no matter how hard he insisted he wasn't. His whole defense was none of this matters, including me. The counter to that is a person who keeps acting like it matters anyway, keeps showing up, keeps leaving the door open, until the relentlessness of being treated as redeemable starts, against all his armor, to feel like it might be true. Charlie's sincerity wasn't bouncing because it was weak. It was the only thing in hell aimed at the right target. It just hadn't hit yet. That was the handle, same as every story like this. The thing that reaches the locked soul is the precise thing the soul is armored against. The clan's pride, the Punisher's need to know, Wade's whole self-built fortress of nothing's real, and the one princess in hell stubborn enough to keep insisting that he was, until he had to either prove her wrong or let himself believe her. She was going to need time to land it, and the thing about hell, the thing the whole place runs on, is that it never gives you time. Because the angels were coming. It arrived the way it always arrived, not as a surprise, but as a date on a calendar, which is worse, the slow red dread of a thing you can see coming and can't stop. The extermination, the annual harvest, heaven's exorcists descending on Pentagram City with holy steel to thin the herd, and this year, for the first time, with a specific interest in a certain stubborn hotel that had been making noise up in heaven about whether the whole massacre was necessary at all. The hotel was a target now. Charlie's family, Vaggie Husk Nifty, the spider who'd finally cracked Wade's armor, Charlie herself, every one of them could die the real death, the forever one, when the angels came. Every one of them except Wade. And that was the choice the section ended on, the choice the whole story had been quietly building towards since he fell out of the sky. Wade Wilson could not be killed by the angels. He could not be owned by the V's, could not be unsettled by Alistair, could not be threatened by the second death. He was the one being in all of hell that the extermination could not touch, which meant he was also the one being in all of hell who could simply walk away from it. No stakes, no risk. Nothing forcing him to stay and stand between heaven's blades and a family that had, against his every effort, started to feel like the first home the land of the dead had ever offered him. He could leave, untouchable, the way he'd left every place that ever started to mean something, before it could cost him anything. Or he could stay in a place that couldn't threaten him, couldn't own him, and couldn't make him do a single thing he didn't choose, and find out whether a man who nothing can compel would choose, freely, with no leash and no clock pointed at his own neck, to stand and fight for something real. The angels were coming. The merc who couldn't die stood at the door he'd spent his whole life keeping open, the easy exit, the joke that lets you leave before anything gets serious. And for the first time, he didn't walk through it. He didn't walk back into the hotel either, not yet. He just stood in the doorway between the two, with the red sky going redder behind him, and quiet, no bit, no audience, the cover all the way off for once, tried to figure out whether a thing that can't be made to matter is allowed to choose to matter anyway. Every story Wade Wilson had ever been in, he survived the same way, by knowing it was a story. That was the secret, that was the whole magic trick. When you know you're in a story, when you can feel the audience out past the fourth wall, when you can hear the music swell and see the edit coming, then nothing can actually get you, because nothing is actually real. A joke is a door, and Wade had spent an entire immortal lifetime keeping that door propped open, one foot always in the hallway, so that the instant a moment got too real, too heavy, too close to the wound, he could step out, turn to the camera, and remind everyone inkle. Uding himself that none of it counted. He had never once met a moment he couldn't joke his way out of, Not a death, not a loss, not a single thing in a long and ridiculous life. The door always opened, the bit always landed, he always got out. And then a princess who should have given up on him 100 jokes ago, who had every reason to, who had been told by everyone in hell that he was a waste of her impossible hope, refused to, kept the light on, kept setting the place at the table, kept treating him, against all his evidence and all his armor, as something real and worth saving. And on the worst night hell had seen in a generation, with the sky full of angels, and the people he'd pretended not to love about to die the forever death, Wade Wilson reached for the door he always kept open. And for the first time in his entire impossible life, he didn't walk through it. He had so many funny things he could have said. He'd been saving some good ones. He didn't say any of them, and that, the silence where the joke should have been, is the whole story. Let me set the scene, because the scene is genuinely awesome, and you deserve it before it breaks your heart. The extermination came down on Pentagram City the way it always did, a sky splitting open in holy gold, a host of angels descending with spears that could end a sinner forever, beautiful and merciless, an army that had never once met something it couldn't kill, here to do the math heaven did every year. Too many damned, so harvest the surplus. And this year they came for the hotel specifically, because the hotel had become an idea, and heaven kills ideas the same way it kills everything, with a clean, bright blade and no regret. The family stood to fight because of course they did. Charlie, terrified and luminous, her whole impossible mission about to be tested in blood. Vaggie with her spear, a fallen exorcist turning heaven's own art against it. Husk, nifty, angel dust, the spider stepping up beside the others, the comedian done deflecting, because some nights you stop joking and pick up a gun. They were brave. They were also, every single one of them, killable, and the angels could not be killed by anything they had, and the math was the math. Except there was one guest in that hotel the holy steel could not touch. And for one glorious, ridiculous, deeply cathartic stretch of the night, Wade Wilson cut loose. Picture it, an army of angels whose entire identity is that they kill everything that lives, meeting the one thing in all of creation that will not stop getting back up. They ran him through. He pulled the spear out and thanked them for the piercing. They cut him down. He reassembled mid-quip and kept coming. The exorcists who had slaughtered the damned for centuries and never once faced a target that healed, met a buzzsaw in red who treated their unstoppable holy weapons like a mild inconvenience and a great opportunity for material. It was the kind of sequence the whole video had been promising, the unkillable man as a one-creature counter-extermination, moving through the gold-armored host like a rumor of the apocalypse. An angel pinned Nifty in an alley. Wade took the spear meant for her through his own chest, looked down at it, said you missed everything important and also her, and removed both the weapon and the angel from the situation. A second exorcist had Husk dead to rights. Wade arrived wearing a borrowed halo at a deeply disrespectful angle and turned the moment into a bar fight, which is the one kind of fight Husk could actually help with. He fought toward people. That was the tell, if anyone had been watching closely enough to read it. Every reckless, deathless charge had a name on the other end of it. He wasn't carving up heaven for fun. He was standing between heaven and a family, and using the one gift his curse had ever given him to do it, and laughing the whole way so that nobody, least of all him, would notice that the merc who insisted he was just passing through was fighting like a man defending his home. He was magnificent. He was hysterical. He was, for the first time in his life, exactly the right tool for the job, the unkillable man, in a war against things that kill. Finally, somewhere his curse was a gift. He carved a hole in the host of heaven and laughed the whole way through, and it was the most fun anyone in hell had ever had during an extermination, and the audience, you loved every second of it. And I need you to hear me, because this is the most important sentence in the whole video. That was not the climax. The spectacle is never the climax, not in this story, not in any of them. The unkillable man beating angels is a crowd pleaser, and it's earned, and it's fun, but it is not the thing the story is about, and the story knows it even while it's letting you enjoy the fireworks. Because beating the angels was easy for Wade, it cost him nothing. He can't die throwing his deathless body at a problem is the one thing he's always been able to do. It required no faith, no change, no courage at all. The climax was quieter than that. The climax was a thing that happened in about 4 seconds, off to the side, while the fireworks were still going, and it required the single hardest thing Wade Wilson had ever been asked to do. It required him to mean it. Here's the 4 seconds. In the middle of the chaos, it went wrong, the way it always goes wrong. An angel broke through, and it wasn't coming for Wade, because why would it? Wade was a nuisance, and the angels had recalibrated. It was coming for Charlie. And Charlie, in that instant, faltered, because the thing about staking your whole life on a fragile, impossible hope is that there comes a moment, usually the worst one, when the hope fails you, when you look at the blade coming and the family bleeding and the sky full of heaven's certainty that you were always wrong, and your faith, the load-bearing faith, the thing the whole hotel stands on, just buckles. Charlie Morningstar, in the worst second of her afterlife, stopped believing. You could see it. The light went out of her. Maybe they're right, maybe nobody changes, maybe I was always a joke. And Wade saw it. He saw the believer lose her faith, and he understood, in a way that hit him like the only real thing that had ever hit him, that if Charlie stopped believing, then the one good idea in all of hell died right here, tonight, and everything she'd built, including the place that had, without his permission, become the first home he'd had in longer than he could remember, died with it. He could have made a joke, he had one ready. He could have turned to you, to the camera, to the audience he always kept one eye on, and deflected the whole unbearable moment into a bit, the way he'd deflected every unbearable moment for 40 years, and stepped out the door he always kept open. He didn't look at the camera. For the first time in the entire story, and if you go back and check, you'll find the narrator, the guy who's been talking to you this whole time, the running mouth that never once shut up, for the first time he stopped talking to you. The fourth wall, the door he always kept open, the audience he always kept one eye on so that nothing could ever fully land, gone. He didn't step out of the moment. He stepped all the way into it. He put his deathless body between Charlie and the blade. That part was easy. That part he'd done as a bit a dozen times. The unkillable man taking a hit is a gag, not a sacrifice. But then he did the part that wasn't easy. The part that was the actual climax. The part that cost him everything his armor was built to protect, because it required him to say a true thing with his whole chest and no door behind it to escape through. Time did the thing time does in the moment that matters. It slowed. It went quiet, the gold light and the screaming and the whole burning sky pulling back to a hush, until there was just a red man on his knees in the wreckage and a princess who'd stopped believing, and 4 seconds and a choice. He looked at Charlie, not the audience Charlie, her actual eyes, the eyes that had looked at him on a rooftop weeks ago and seen the flicker under the joke when everyone else saw a weapon, and he said the thing he did not believe, the thing his whole despairing immortal life was evidence against, the thing it should have been flat-out impossible for the most hopeless creature in hell to say. He gave her back her own faith, sincerely, with no joke in front of it and no door held open behind it, and his voice did the thing it had never once done in front of another living soul. It broke, all the way, the manhole cover gone, nothing left underneath it now, but the man who'd been hiding down there for 40 years. Hey, look at me, you were right, you hear me, you were right, people change, I know because, and here it cracked, actually cracked, because I did, you did it. You reached the one guy who couldn't be reached, can't die, can't be scared, can't be bought, the guaranteed lost cause, the bit that never stops, you got me, you stubborn, ridiculous, impossible kid. And if you can change me, then your whole crazy idea isn't a dream, it's true, it's the truest thing in this entire rotten beautiful place, so don't you dare stop believing it now. Not when you just proved it on the hardest case in the building. Get up, you're the princess of hell, and you were right about all of it, you were right about me. And that right there, the merc with a mouth choosing, with his whole heart and not one molecule of irony, to let one single thing be real was the transformation. Not the angels, not the fight, not a single drop of the blood he'd spilled all night, because none of that had cost him anything. This cost him everything, a door for the first time in a lifetime allowed to swing shut, with him still standing. The room, no exit, no audience, no joke, nowhere to hide from the fact that he meant it. Charlie got up. And her faith came back not because she talked herself into it, but because the universe had just handed her proof, in red, the one piece of evidence that could not be argued with. The soul that nothing could compel had chosen, freely, to believe he was more than the worst thing he'd ever been. The believer was restored by the one creature who'd had no business believing, and the hotel held, and the family lived. And the angels, for reasons heaven would spend a long time failing to explain, broke against a hope they could not kill, and withdrew. Step back and see what just happened, because it's the entire reason this matchup is more than a crossover gag. Charlie's whole life rested on one proposition: the damned can change, and hell and heaven had 100 ways of secretly making that proposition meaningless. Sure, they change when you threaten them with the extermination. Sure, they reach for the door when they're scared of the second death. Sure, they earn heaven like Sir Pentious did, the snake who became good and ascended in a blaze of glory, the first soul ever redeemed. Pentious was real proof, and it mattered, but it could always be doubted by a cynic, because Pentious had something to gain: heaven, the reward, the way out. A skeptic could always say he changed to earn the prize. Wade had no prize to earn. That's the thing. That's the whole thing. He couldn't ascend, he wasn't a finished soul. Heaven had no slot for him. The graduation certificate was off the table from the start. He couldn't be threatened into it. The extermination couldn't touch him. He couldn't be bought into it. He wanted nothing. He was the one soul in all of creation who could change for no reason at all, no reward, no threat, no leash, nothing forcing his hand or sweetening the deal. So when he chose it anyway, when the one creature nothing could compel chose, freely, to be more than what he was, he proved the thing Sir Pentious couldn't quite prove all the way. That redemption was never a punishment you escape, or a reward you earn by suffering, or a prize you ascend to collect. It was a choice, available to anyone, even the guy with no stakes, especially the guy with no stakes, because his choice was the only one in the whole afterlife with no ulterior motive attached to it. Charlie had spent her life trying to prove the damned could change, and the proof, when it finally came from the one damned thing that had absolutely nothing to gain by changing, which made it the cleanest proof there could ever be. She'd been right. The video, like all the videos on this channel, was secretly about one quiet idea the whole time, and here it is. You don't change because something makes you. You change because you finally let yourself believe you're allowed to. Wade proved it by being the one creature nothing could make do anything, and doing it anyway. He won her the argument. He just couldn't stay to celebrate it. Here's where the comedy finishes, paying for the heartbreak. Here's the ache the jokes were hiding the whole time. He couldn't stay. Not wouldn't, couldn't, and it's worth being honest about the mechanics, the way these stories always level with you, because the cruelty of it is precise. Wade had finally done it, found the one place in all the worlds that wanted him, the hotel for the people everyone else had given up on, a found family that had absorbed him chair by chair and joke by joke until it was, against every word out of his mouth, home. The land of the dead, the country he'd spent his whole life trying to get a passport to, had finally opened a door and said, "You can belong here." And the deepest law of the place would not let him keep it. Because to truly belong to hell, to check in, to stay, to be one of them, you have to be dead. That's the one rule under all the other rules, the foundation the whole afterlife stands on. And Wade isn't dead. He never finished dying. That was the glitch that let him fall in, and it was always, from the very first night, going to be the thing that pulled him back out. He couldn't be redeemed and released upward, because heaven had no category for a soul still wearing a living body. He couldn't be killed and kept downward, because the killing never takes. He was the one creature the afterlife's rules could not hold in either direction, and now that the crisis was over, now that the glitch had lingered too long, the universe did the thing universes do. It corrected. He felt it start the way you feel a tide go out, the red world beginning to thin around him, the pull of the land of the living, where his deathless, lonely, unkillable life was still running, still waiting, still his. Not a punishment, just physics. A not dead man cannot remain among the dead, no matter how badly the dead have come to want him, no matter how badly he's come to want them back. Hee-ha. D found the afterlife that would have him, and he was the single soul in it who could never, ever check in. And here is the specific, surgical cruelty of it, the thing that makes it the saddest version of this story we've told on this channel. He hadn't lost the home because he failed. He'd lost it because he succeeded. He did the thing, he changed, he let it be real. He proved the impossible case, and the proving used up the only loophole that had ever let him stay. As long as he was a glitch, a joke, a thing just passing through, the universe hadn't bothered to correct him. The moment he stopped performing and committed, the moment he became real, he became a real problem with a real answer. And the answer was, you don't belong here. You were never dead, go home. He spent his whole life being told he was too broken, too unserious, too much the clown to be let into anything that mattered. He finally earned his way into the thing that mattered, and the door he earned his way through was the same door that pushed him back out, because the cost of becoming someone who deserved to stay was becoming someone the rules had to send away. "Ah," he said softly, looking at his own hand as it started very slightly to go translucent at the edges. Aw, come on, of course. I find the one place that lets the broken toys stay and I'm too broken even for that. And he laughed, but it was the small laugh, the real one, the one with nothing bulletproof in it. I can't check out. I told you that on day one, remember? Turns out I can't check in either. I'm just visiting. I was always just visiting. A beat in the next part came out so quiet it almost wasn't there. Found the place, found the people, and the fine print says I don't get to keep them. That tracks. That's so on brand for my life it's almost funny. He swallowed. Almost. Charlie was crying, the whole family was, and Wade, fading, going, pulled back toward a life he'd never wanted and now had to return to alone, did the second bravest thing of the night, which was to not make it easier on himself with a joke, to just let it hurt. To stand in the only home he'd ever found and let himself, for once, feel the whole unbearable weight of having to leave it, the manhole cover gone for good, the wound finally, completely uncovered in front of people who, and this was the part that undid him, were sad to see him go. People who would miss him. He'd forgotten what that felt like. He got to remember it for exactly as long as it took to lose it. The spider reached him first, because of course he did, the one who'd worn the same armor, who'd cracked the same way, who'd said that's how it gets you, you just stop leaving. Angel Dust stood in front of the fading red shape and didn't make a bit either, which for the two of them was the most intimate thing imaginable, two comedians declining at the very end to be funny. You did the thing I couldn't, Angel said, rough, right at the end there, you let the whole thing be real. Yeah, well, Wade's voice was almost gone now, the way the rest of him was almost gone. Don't wait till the end, okay? That's my one piece of advice. That's the whole TED Talk. Don't do what I did. Let it be real now while you've still got a room here. You hear me? You get to stay, so stay. Properly. Not the way I had to. And then he turned to all of them, Charlie and Vaggie and Husk and Nifty and the spider, the accidental family that had absorbed him chair by chair while he swore up and down he was only passing through, and he looked at them the way Charlie had spent the entire story trying to get him to look at himself, and he didn't say anything clever, because there wasn't anything clever left in him. He'd spent it all on the truth, and the truth had emptied him out in the best possible way. Thanks for the room, he said, even if I couldn't keep it. It's the nicest thing anybody ever offered me, and trust me, I've been offered some weird stuff. 3 things here are guesses, and a story this honest should say so, even through the tears. We don't know which Wade this even is. The whole thing runs on the version whose immortality is a curse, the one death herself won't take, the one who longs to die and can't, because that's the only version where landing in hell is a tragedy instead of a Tuesday. A different Deadpool from a different shelf might walk into Hazbin and have a completely different and much stupider time. We picked the one with a heart. That's a choice, and it's flagged as one. We don't know that a not dead man can be in hell at all, or that the universe would pull him back the way this telling says. No canon has ever put these 2 things in the same room, so the entire mechanism, the glitch, the lingering, the correction, is a reasonable invention, not an established rule. We built the cage that made the story ache, and we're telling you we built it. And we don't know what heaven would do with a so. Well, it can't categorize. We said it had no slot for him. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe somewhere up past the part of the story we get to see, a soul that chose redemption with nothing to gain is exactly the kind of thing that breaks a binary system wide open, and maybe that's a different video. We left the door open on purpose. He'd appreciate that. He always kept one open. What isn't a guess is the shape of it. A man who spent forever certain he could never be more than the joke met someone who refused to agree, and chose, freely, with nothing forcing him, to be more, and then had to leave the only place that ever told him he could. That part's true even if all the mechanics are made up. That's the part that's the point. He left them something, on his way out of existence, and it wasn't a gag. As he faded, Wade reached up and took off the mask, the red one, the face he'd hidden behind for a lifetime, the literal armor, and he set it down on the hook by the hotel's front door, the bit laid to rest at last, where the man who couldn't stay had finally, for 4 whole seconds, stopped performing and let himself be real. And then he was gone, pulled back to the land of the living, to his deathless, lonely life, carrying the one thing he hadn't had when he fell out of the sky, the knowledge proven on himself that he was more than what he'd been. He didn't get to keep the home, he got to keep the proof. For a man who'd believed for 40 years that nobody ever gets to stop being who they are, that was either a grace or a curse, and the truest thing about Wade Wilson is that he'd have told you with a wet laugh that it was both. And the hotel was changed by having had him. Charlie's faith wasn't a fragile hope anymore. It was load-bearing, proven in the impossible case, the one nobody could argue with, the foundation she'd build the rest of her mission on. Angel Dust had watched someone wear his exact armor and admit it was a wound, and that admission doesn't unhappen. The spider was a little more reachable now, a little more willing to let a real thing into the room. The whole family had learned that the cynic who insists he's only passing through is sometimes the one who will stand in the doorway when the angels come. They set a chair for him at the table after that and left it empty, the way you do for someone who mattered, the way the dead keep a place for the living, which, in this one impossible case, was exactly backward and exactly right. So redemption in the end was never about whether you could be punished. The Punisher learned a version of that. The clan and the god and the hunter all learned theirs. Here's Hazbin's version, the one with jokes on top and an ache underneath. Redemption was never about whether something could make you change. It was about whether you'd let yourself believe you were allowed to, and the proof of that, the cleanest proof there could ever be, came from the one soul that nothing in all of creation could make do anything, who looked at a stubborn princess's impossible hope and decided freely, for no reward and under no threat, to let it be true. The merc with a mouth finally ran out of things to say. He walked back out of the only place that ever told him he could be more than the joke, and he didn't make a single one on the way. And that, coming from him, was the loudest thing he ever said. Okay, one more then, he'd want it. There was a chimichanga place 2 blocks from the hotel that survived the extermination. Somebody should tell them the red guy says it was the best meal he ever had in the afterlife. He never did get to finish it. He's going to be okay, though. For the first time in a very long life, knowing what he knows now, he's actually going to be okay.